Set it down anywhere. Isaiah, she said, and I did, easing the box onto the old pine floor of her grandmother's farmhouse. The evening light poured gold across the pasture and in through the windows, and the whole table smelled of roast chicken and red wine. Then, before I could even straighten up, Grace looked across at her father's business partner and said it plain. "He's going to be my husband." Nobody moved. A fork hung in the air. A chair creaked and went still. The box was still warm against my chest. I did not breathe. "My name is Isaiah Coleman. I am 34 years old, and I live alone in a rented house on the edge of Middleburg, Virginia, where the roads turn to gravel and the fields run on forever. Most mornings I am up before the sun, boots by the door, a thermos of coffee going cold in a steel mug on the dash of my truck. I work with my hands now. I am a crew lead for Sutton Builders, and there is a kind of honesty in that I have come to need. It was not always this way. Once, I was a structural engineer. I spent years behind a desk with a license on the wall and drawings spread out under fluorescent light, deciding whether steel and timber would hold the weight of the lives that would move through them. For 2 years now I had been carrying other people's things into other people's houses instead. It suited me. Nobody at Sutton Builders asked what I used to do, and I did not offer. A man is allowed to keep a door or two closed. I was married once too. Her name was Vanessa. We had no children, and in the end we had less than that. The marriage came apart the same season my old life did, and I will get to the why of that later, because the why matters. For now it is enough to say that when the dust settled, I wanted work that did not lie to me. Wood does not lie. A level does not flatter you. Either the thing is true or it is not. Walter Sutton was the man who gave me that work. He owns the company, a good regional outfit that restores old estates and barns and builds the kind of places people get married in. Walter is somewhere in his late 50s, a working man to the bone, with hands rougher than mine, and a way of judging a person by what they do rather than what they say. He hired me on a handshake and a half day of watching me work. "You measure twice," he said. I like that. He never once asked to see a resume. I was more grateful for that than he knew. His daughter was named Grace. I met her the way you meet most people out here, in passing, at the edge of a job. Her grandmother Mabel had passed the year before and left Grace the old farmhouse, the one at the end of the lane with the sagging porch and the good bones. Grace hired her father's company to bring it back, and Walter put me in charge of the work. That was how it started. A house that needed saving, and a woman who could not stop coming to watch it be saved. She was 31, quiet in a way most people are not, the kind of quiet that pays attention. The first afternoon I was there, she came out onto the porch with a box of her grandmother's things and set it down beside me while I pried up rotten boards. She reached in and drew out a quilt, blue and white, the stitches small and even, and made by a hand that had loved the work. "My grandmother stitched this," she said, holding it up so the light came through the thin places. "Blue for the sky over these fields," she said. Then she folded it careful and set it on the porch rail, like she was leaving a little of Mabel there to keep an eye on things. I did not think much of it at the time. I thought about joists and footings and whether the whole southeast corner would need to come up. I did not know yet that the quilt would follow me through everything that came after, or that the woman who set it on that rail already knew something about the two of us that I would be the last to understand. That is the thing about my life back then. I had spent so long making myself small, making myself quiet, keeping the shape of who I used to be tucked away where nobody could use it against me, that I had stopped expecting anyone to look close. I fixed what was broken, and I went home to an empty house, and I called that peace. And for a while, it was. But the farmhouse at the end of the lane had other plans. So did Grace. And so, though I did not know his name yet, did a man named Gordon Delaney. The work on Mabel's house ran into the fall of that year and then past it, the way old houses always do. You open one wall and it shows you 3 more problems behind it, I did not mind. I had nowhere I would rather be. And Grace, it turned out, felt the same, though for reasons I was too slow to read. There was a night in early spring I think of as the beginning, though neither of us called it anything then. A storm came down out of the Blue Ridge with no manners at all, rain sideways, the sky the color of a bruise. I had stayed late to close up the house against it, tarps over the open framing, tools under cover. As I came around the front, I saw the porch step, the second one up, had rotted clean through at the stringer. In good weather, it was a repair for tomorrow. In that rain, with the boards slick and the whole thing ready to drop a person straight through, it was a broken ankle waiting to happen. So I fixed it. I did not think about the hour or the rain running cold down the back of my collar. I pulled the bad tread, cut a new one from the stock in my truck, and set it right, kneeling in the mud with a flashlight in my teeth. I was tightening the last screw when headlights swung into the lane. Grace. She had come to check on the house in the storm, same as me. She sat in her car a moment, watching me through the streaked windshield, and then she came out under an umbrella. The wind turned useless in about 4 seconds. "You're soaked to the bone," she said. "What are you even doing?" Step was gone, I said, standing, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Didn't want anybody coming down on it in the dark. That's not on the schedule. I'll have my father pay you for the extra." "No," I said. "It's a step. You don't bill a person for a step." She looked at me then. Really looked. The rain coming down between us, and something in her face shifted that I did not have a name for. I thought it was surprise. I know now it was something older and quieter than that. After that night, things changed in small ways I told myself not to notice. There was coffee, for one. I would come to work and find a cup waiting on the tailgate of my truck, still hot, fixed exactly the way I took it, which I had mentioned once, months before, in passing. I never saw her leave it. It was just there, most mornings, like the day had decided to be kind to me before I even started it. She began to stay. At first, she had reasons, measuring for curtains, sorting Mabel's boxes, deciding on paint, but the reasons got thinner as the weeks went on, and still she stayed, sitting on an overturned bucket with a mug in her hands, asking me about the work. Not small talk. Real questions. Why that joint and not another? What's that crack in the plaster telling you? I would show her how to read a wall, how a hairline crack that runs at an angle is the house talking about its foundation, how one that runs straight is usually just age. She listened, like it mattered. Nobody had listened to me like that in a long time. The crew came to like her, which is not a thing that happens easily with a client's daughter. She learned their names and their coffee orders and the names of their kids. She never once pulled rank, never once reminded anyone whose father signed the checks. And slowly, without either of us deciding it, the two of us fell into a rhythm. She would come at the tail of the day, when the light went long and the others had gone home, and I would keep working and she would keep me company, and the silence between us got comfortable in a way silence with another person almost never does. I looked forward to it. I told myself I looked forward to the coffee. The truth is, I would have kept working long past dark just to keep her sitting on that bucket a little longer, and more nights than I will admit I did. There was an afternoon a supplier came by to drop off lumber, and when he saw me running the crew he said something under his breath to Grace, something with the word just in it. "He's just labor, isn't he?" Or close to it, the way certain men say it. Before I could let it slide the way I had trained myself to, Grace set down her mug and said, evenly, "He's the reason this house is going to still be standing in 100 years. I'd watch how you talk about him." The man reddened and found somewhere else to be. I kept my eyes on the board I was cutting and did not trust myself to speak. It had been years since anyone stood in front of me like that. I told myself it was kindness. Grace was a kind person. That much was plain. She was kind to the crew, kind to the old dog that wandered up from the next farm, kind to the memory of her grandmother in every choice she made about that house. So, of course, she was kind to me. That was the story I told myself, and I held on to it, because the other story, the one the rest of you can probably see coming a mile off, was one I did not think I was allowed to have. I knew, in the back of my mind, the shape of the world she came from. Old families, old land, Sunday dinners with the right people in the right clothes. I had eaten in enough of those houses, in my other life, to know how a room like that decides who belongs and who is only passing through. I told myself that was another reason to keep my door closed, that a man like me, in a place like this, was smart to want nothing he was not offered. It never once occurred to me that she might be sitting in those same rooms, in the right clothes, thinking about a soaked man fixing a stair in the rain. The cold came early that year. One evening in late fall, I stayed past dark to finish setting the new porch posts, working by the light of a clamp lamp, my breath coming out in clouds. I did not hear her come up behind me. I only felt it, the sudden weight settling over my shoulders. Wool and cotton, warm from the house. The quilt, blue for the sky over these fields. She did not say anything. She just draped it across my back, and by the time I turned around she was already walking to her car, keys in her hand, not looking back. "Grace," I called, "you forgot your—" "Keep it for now," she said, without stopping. "You need it more than the porch rail does." I stood there in the dark with her grandmother's quilt around my shoulders, and something in my chest I had shut off a long time ago. Some small pilot light ticked back on against my will. Later that night, she left the quilt folded on the seat of my truck, like she had forgotten it there. She had not. I understood that much, even then. What I did not understand, what I would not let myself understand, was why a woman like that, from a family like hers, would leave a piece of her grandmother's heart on the seat of a working man's truck and drive away smiling into the dark. I should have known. All the signs were there, laid out plain as framing. But a man who has trained himself not to hope gets very good at not seeing. So I folded the quilt, and I set it on the dash next to the cold coffee, and I drove home to my empty house, and I told myself, one more time, that it was only kindness. It was not only kindness, but it would be a long time, and it would cost the both of us a great deal before I let myself say so. By the following spring, the farmhouse was nearly done, and the wider world came calling in the shape of a man named Gordon Delaney. Gordon owned the vineyard that bordered the Sutton land, a man of old money and older opinions, the kind who wore the same barn coat as everyone else, but somehow made sure you knew his cost 4 times what yours did. He had a plan to build a grand event pavilion on his property, weddings, galas, the whole business, and he brought that plan to Walter because Sutton Builders was the best outfit in the county and Gordon Delaney only ever bought the best. Walter took the job. It was a big one, the kind that sets a company up for years, and I was proud to be put on it. Gordon had his own engineer of record for the design, a firm out of Northern Virginia called Brandt Engineering. When Walter said the name at a site meeting, something went cold and still in my stomach, but I said nothing. There was no reason to. A crew lead does not comment on the engineer of record. I kept my head down and I built what the drawings told me to build. Gordon did not care for me from the first. I felt it the way you feel weather coming. He would arrive at the site with his son Blake in tow, a soft, pleasant young man Gordon clearly had plans for, and he would talk over me, around me, through me, as if I were part of the scaffolding. Once, when I answered a question he had asked the heir about the roof framing, he looked at me a long moment and then turned back to Walter as though I had not spoken. And it was no secret at all whose son he thought ought to be walking Grace Sutton down some aisle. He said it in front of me more than once, the way a man says a thing in front of the furniture. "Blake and Grace," he would say. "Now, there is a match that makes sense for everybody." Grace never bit. She would go quiet and hard around the eyes and change the subject, and Gordon would chuckle like her refusal was a charming phase. I said nothing about any of it. It was not my place, and besides, I had a bigger problem taking shape up on the roofline. It was in the drawings. The main pavilion roof was a long, clear span, no columns in the middle, the way you want a wedding hall to be, and the way that span was carried down into the walls, the connection detail where the great timber beams met the steel, was wrong, not ugly, not sloppy. Wrong in the quiet, dangerous way that only shows itself in a hard winter when the snow piles up and the wind leans in and the load finds the weak point you left it. I knew that detail. I had seen it before. I had refused to put my name on one just like it, 2 years earlier, at a firm called Brandt. I brought it to the site super first, then to Walter, plainly, no drama. This connection won't carry a full snow load, I said. It needs to be redesigned before we frame it. Walter, to his credit, did not laugh me off. He had watched me measure twice for a year and a half. But it was not his call. It was the engineer's. And the engineer answered to Gordon. Gordon's answer was what I expected. He came down the hill with a rolled set of plans under his arm and a smile with no warmth in it. "Son," he said, "I appreciate a man who takes an interest, but you swing a hammer. Leave the drawings to the people who went to school for them." He tapped the Brandt logo in the corner of the sheet. "These folks are professionals. I want to be honest about what that felt like, standing there. It was not the anger you might expect. It was an old, familiar tiredness, the particular exhaustion of being the most qualified person in a place and having that fact used as proof of your arrogance. I had spent 2 years making myself small, partly to outrun that exact feeling, and here it had found me anyway, wearing a hard hat and my ex-wife's voice, because I could have let it go. 2 years of training told me to let it go, but I thought about 150 people under that roof on a January wedding day, and I could not. "The people who went to school made a mistake," I said. "I can show you exactly where." And that was when the door of the site trailer opened and my past walked out of it, wearing a hard hat that had never seen a day of real work. Vanessa. Brandt had sent her, of all people, out to represent the firm on their marquee job. She had done well for herself in the 2 years since. I could see it in the cut of her coat. She saw me and stopped, and for just a second there was the old her behind her eyes. And then she chose, the way she always chose, the room over the truth. "Isaiah," she said, "warm as anything, loud enough for everyone." My goodness. I had heard you'd come down in the world, but I didn't believe it. She turned to Gordon, and she smiled, and she slid the knife in gentle. "Mr. Delaney, I should tell you, Isaiah used to work at Brandt, briefly. He always did think he understood a structure better than the entire firm that employed him. It's why he isn't there anymore. I'd take whatever he's telling you with a very large grain of salt. Every true thing she said was a lie in the shape of a fact. I had worked at Brandt. I had left. I did think I understood that connection better than the man who drew it, because I did, but the way she laid it out, I came off as a bitter, failed nobody with a grudge, and there is no defense you can make against that in the moment that does not sound exactly like what a bitter, failed nobody would say. I felt the whole site rearrange itself around me." Gordon's smile widened. Blake looked at his shoes, and I saw Grace, standing at the edge of it, hearing every word, hearing this woman name herself as my ex-wife without ever saying the words, and I watched her fold the edge of the quilt she was carrying, tighter and tighter around her hand, and turn her face out toward the empty pasture, and say nothing at all. I picked my wrench back up off the plywood. I set it down slow. "That connection will fail under snow load," I said. "To Gordon, to Vanessa, to all of them. I'll put it in writing." And I walked off that hill with my back straight and my name in the dirt behind me. Walter found me at my truck an hour later. He did not ask me about Brandt. He did not ask me about Vanessa. He just said, "Quiet, show me the detail again, the one that's wrong." And when I did, he looked at it a long time, and then he said, "I'm going to stop that phase. I'll get an independent review. If you're wrong, it costs me a week. If you're right, he did not finish it. He did not have to. He put his hand on my shoulder once, and he walked back up the hill to make some phone calls that were going to cost him a great deal of Gordon Delaney's goodwill. The Sunday that followed, Grace held the first supper in her grandmother's finished house. It should have been a happy thing. The house was done, and it was beautiful. Mabel's house brought back from the edge, every board of it true. Grace invited her parents, Walter and Susan, and she invited the Delaneys because Gordon was her father's partner, and out here you do not uninvite a neighbor no matter what has passed. And she invited me. I almost did not go. A man knows when he is walking into a room that does not want him. But Grace asked me herself, standing by my truck with her chin up, and I have never in my life been able to tell that woman no. So there I was, that gold evening, carrying a box up the porch steps I had rebuilt in the rain a year before. Mabel's things, the good dishes and platters, boxed away through the dust of the renovation and folded on top, the quilt that had traveled between us all year. Everything coming home. Set it down anywhere, Isaiah, Grace said. And I did, easing it onto the pine floor by the table. Before I could straighten up, Gordon Delaney, 2 glasses of wine into the evening and sure of every inch of the room, looked at me and then at Walter and said, "Walter, I have to ask, do you make a habit of having the help to supper? Or is this one special?" And he laughed, and Susan's smile went tight and frightened, and the whole table held its breath. And Grace stood up. She did not raise her voice. She looked across the table at Gordon Delaney, her father's business partner, and she said it plain and clear. "He's going to be my husband." Nobody moved. A fork hung in the air. The box was still warm against my chest where I had held it. Then Grace turned to me, and to all of them, and she told the truth she had been carrying longer than I ever guessed. "I didn't hire this man to fix a porch," she said. "I hired him so I'd stop finding excuses to drive past this house just to see if his truck was here. I've known since the storm, since the night he tore his hands up in the rain fixing a step nobody paid him to fix, and then wouldn't take a dime for it. I've known every single day since, and I've watched all of you look straight through him, and I am done watching it." I stood there with my hands empty and my heart going like a hammer. Everything I had told myself was kindness turned over in the light and showed its true face, and I understood, all at once and far too late, exactly what she had been leaving on my truck seat all that time. Susan found her voice first, thin and shaking. "Grace, people will talk, you know they will." "Let them," Grace said. Gordon set down his glass. "This is absurd. Grace, this man is a laborer with a grudge and a story, and half of what he's told you is." "I'm a licensed structural engineer," I said. It was the first time I had said those words out loud in 2 years. The room turned to me. I just could not stand in that house, at that table, next to that woman, and let the lie keep standing 1 minute longer. I looked at Walter. He had set down his knife and his fork, and he was watching me the way he watched me the first day, taking my measure. He did not look surprised or angry. He looked like a man waiting to see what I would do with the truth now that it was out on the table between the dishes. So I told it straight. "I hold a license in this state," I said, looking at Gordon. "I spent 7 years at a firm before I ever picked up a hammer for Sutton Builders. I left because they wanted me to sign a detail exactly like the one on your pavilion, and I had done the math 4 times hoping I was wrong, and I was not wrong. They called it a restructuring. I called it a signature I would not put my name to, because putting it there would have made me a liar, and maybe made me worse than that. I let that sit. It cost me the job, and it cost me my marriage, because Vanessa wanted a man who would sign the paper and keep the salary, and I turned out to be a different man than the one she married. I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because I am finished, after 2 years, letting other people tell my story with the facts turned inside out. The clock on Mabel's mantel ticked into the silence. Gordon's face had gone a bad color. Then I turned to Grace. Because she had said a brave thing in front of the people whose opinion had ruled her whole life, and she had said it before I was proven right about a single thing, when I was still just a laborer with a story and a bad name walking in the door. She had claimed me when claiming me cost her something. The least I could do, the most I could do, was claim her back. "I don't have old land," I said to her, quiet, like the others were not there. "I don't have a family that'll make any of this easy for you. I've got a rented house and a truck and a license I stopped telling people about. But I have wanted to be worth what you've been giving me for longer than I let myself admit. If you'll have me, all the way, out loud, in front of everybody, then yes." She reached down and took my hand, there in front of her family, in front of all of it, and she held on, and she did not let go. The independent review came back 10 days later. The engineer Walter brought in, a woman with 30 years behind her and no patience for anybody's feelings, looked at the pavilion drawings for the better part of an afternoon, and then wrote 3 pages that said, in careful, professional language, exactly what I had said in 4 words on a hillside. The connection would not carry a full snow load. It had to be redesigned before another board went up. When the county plan reviewer took a second look, he flagged the same detail before he had finished his coffee. It was not a close call. It never had been. And then the rest of it came out. Because once people started pulling on the thread, they found the pattern. That detail was not a one-time slip. It was a shortcut Brandt had been using to save money and hit deadlines. On this job and others, the very shortcut I had refused to sign my name to 2 years before. I still had my records from those days. An engineer keeps his correspondence. It is how you protect yourself when you tell powerful people a thing they do not want to hear. I had a folder of emails, dated and clear, showing that I had raised the identical flaw in 2023 and been shown the door for it. Laid next to the pavilion drawings, it told a story no one could spin. I had not been a bitter man with a grudge. I had been a man who was right, and early, and alone. I thought I would feel triumphant when it all came apart for them. I did not. Mostly I felt the strange, hollow relief of a man who has been calling a thing dangerous for years and finally has someone believe him before anyone got hurt. There were no crowds, no grand vindication, just a quiet reshuffling of who in that county got listened to, and a roof that would now be built to hold. That was enough. That was more than I had let myself want. Vanessa's smile did not survive contact with that folder. Her firm went very quiet, and then it went into damage control, and her name stopped coming up on the job. Gordon Delaney's did too, but harder. Because it turned out that when Walter first flagged the problem, Gordon had leaned on him to keep quiet and keep building, to bury it under the schedule and hope the winter was kind. That is the kind of thing that ends a man out here, not loudly, but completely. His partners looked at him differently. The pavilion job was restructured. He kept his vineyard and lost the thing he cared about more, which was the sense that a room would always tilt his way. He tried, once, to make it right with me. He caught me at my truck and started into a speech about how these things get heated and no hard feelings, and perhaps he had spoken hastily. I let him finish. Then I nodded, one time, and got in my truck and drove away. I did not need him to grovel. I did not need a thing from him at all. That, I think, was what he could not stand. Susan came around slower, the way a hard frost lets go of the ground, from the edges in. She had been raised to care what the county thought, and that does not wash off in a day. But she watched her daughter be happier than she had ever seen her, and she watched the man responsible show up for that happiness plainly and without asking for anything, and one Sunday she set a place for me at the table without being asked, and moved the good dishes so I would have room. It was not a speech. It was better than a speech. Out here, a place set for you at the table says everything the mouth is too proud to. Walter never wavered at all. The morning after the review came back, he found me on site and handed me a cup of coffee and said, "I hired a man who does things right." Turns out that's exactly what my daughter did too. That was the whole of it. He never made me thank him, and he never brought it up again. And Grace and I, we took it slow. We had earned the right to. After all that noise, we wanted the quiet. There was no rush in any of it. We had both spent too long being careful with ourselves to be careless now. We went to the diner on the county road on Friday nights. We walked the fence line at Mabel's on Sundays. She showed me the corner of the field where her grandmother had taught her to plant, and I showed her how to site a post so it stands true for 50 years, and somewhere in all of that ordinary, unhurried living, the last of the door I had kept shut for so long simply came off its hinges, and I stopped being afraid of the good thing standing right in front of me. We would sit on Mabel's porch in the evenings, the quilt over both our knees, and not say much of anything, and it was the fullest I had felt in years. I told her the rest of my story, the parts I had kept behind that closed door. She listened the way she had always listened, like it mattered. And when I was done, she said only, "I'd have picked you either way. Engineer or handyman. I picked you at the porch step, remember, before I knew a single thing about you but the way you fixed it." A year later, that pavilion held its first wedding, 150 people under a roof built the way a roof ought to be built. Because I redesigned that connection myself and signed the drawings with my own hand, my name back where it belonged. I stood at the back during the ceremony and watched the timbers I had carried and the steel I had specified hold the weight of all that joy without a whisper of strain, and I thought about how close it had come to being otherwise. I moved my things into Mabel's house that spring, when the wild apple trees along the lane came into bloom and the whole valley smelled of it. The house I had spent 2 years saving became, quietly, mine to keep. Grace and I were married under those same blossoms that season, at Mabel's, with Walter giving her away and Susan setting the tables with the good dishes. The quilt watched from the porch rail, right where Mabel had first set it, and every evening, folded over the back of a chair on the porch, blue for the sky over these fields, that quilt was waiting. I have had a long time now to think about how it all happened and what it means. For 2 years I carried other people's things into other people's houses, and I never once let myself imagine that a door like that might open for me. I had made peace with being useful and unseen. I thought that was the best a man in my position could hope for, to fix what was broken and go home to the quiet and call it enough. I had trained myself so well not to hope that I nearly missed the one person who had been holding a door open for me the whole time, waiting, patient, from the day it rained. That is the part I cannot get over, even now. She had chosen me at the porch step, a soaked stranger fixing a stair he wasn't paid to fix, and she had kept a chair at her table empty and waiting through every dinner, every dismissal, every time her whole world looked straight through me. She never once looked away. She just waited for me to catch up to what she already knew. She asked me to carry a box inside. What she was really asking was whether I would finally let myself stay. I did. For once, I stopped being the man who fixes other people's homes and let one of them become mine. So let me ask you tonight, wherever you are, would you have found the courage to claim someone at your own family's table, the way Grace did, with everyone watching and everything to lose? And have you ever hidden who you really are, made yourself small and quiet, just to feel safe? If this story stayed with you, do me a kindness. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell me down in the comments, who is the one person who ever truly saw you.